Okay, it's 8 o'clock. All right, call it to the meeting to order. First item, I guess, is approve the agenda.
Motion to approve it.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, so the short agenda is approved. How many action items? Do you need to take attendance, Jewel, at all, since we have people on the phone? Possibly? Okay. Okay. All right, just want to make sure. All right, Brian, I guess we'll turn it over to you.
Good morning. Good morning. We're going to discuss the 2021 audit today. And so joining us from our independent auditors, Untitled Barber, are Jennifer Files and Brian Newland.
Welcome.
They will discuss the extent and scope of the audit with you. One of the things they'll be looking for is if there's an area of interest that you would like them to look into. In the past, they've reviewed things like accounts payable, payroll, inventory, overall system access. Staff's recommendation for this year, as you may recall, we received approximately $540,000 from the state, from the federal government, to help customers that were impacted by COVID-19 last year. Since that was below $750,000, we are not required to complete a single audit, but we thought it would be a good idea if YHB reviewed how we allocated those funds to customers to make sure we did it correctly. So with that, I will turn things over to Jennifer, and she will walk you through the audit.
Okay. Welcome again. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you as well. Thanks for having us.
How many audits has this been for you personally here at Loud and Water?
Oh, no. That's almost like asking a woman her age.
I'm trying to remember the first time I saw you. That's why. I've been here 13 years.
Did a couple of times.
When I came to the firm in 2003,
Okay.
we were working on Loud and Water's audit then. So I was a staff accountant for a year or two in that contract. And then I think there was a switch for 5 years. And then it has come back to YHB. So I've been with you since then.
Wow, great.
And appreciate every moment of it. So as Brian mentioned, I'm Jennifer, and I lead the financial statement audit team. Brian Newland, he leads our risk advisory services team. The two of us work very closely, and our teams work very closely together because so much of the financial statement audit process, the control environment, stems in and around your IT systems. So his team will complement our work for the financial statements. The audit overall this year, the standard financial statement audit, one of the things we've already completed is participating in the inventory test count. That was a recommendation that we made coming out of the 2019 audit. It was delayed a little bit with COVID in early 2020, but for this year, with the rise in inventory valuation and with those recommendations that we made in the 2019 audit, we participated with finance in that test count this year. So that's already been completed. Preliminary field work has already been completed, and we are set to start the year-end field work next Monday. So we're about a week out.
Just curiosity, how many people normally work on this audit in your firm?
On the financial statement side, we have 6 auditors that work for about a week and a half to 2 weeks during these next few weeks on the financial statement audit. Brian and his team, you have 2?
Yeah, we usually have 2. My team participates in like the re-engineering and the planning sessions, discuss if there've been any changes, on the financial side that might bleed over into the IT side. So it's myself, and then I have a manager who's been with our firm for, I believe, 7 years now. So we lead the IT component of it.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah. And in addition to our teams, we also have one of our employee benefit plan specialist auditors who participate. They help us with the VRS compliance testing and some of the HR and payroll testing as well. So that rounds out our team. Financial statement wise, not a lot of changes expected this year. GASB implementations, I think you'll have a little bit of a year off for any major implementation before we get into leases.
Does that
Next
include the switch over from operational leases back onto the balance sheet
That'll be next year.
next year? Okay.
Or, yes, next year.
Right. That won't have much of an impact on it.
So it's close, but
Yeah.
good morning.
Jim?
As Brian mentioned, we had talked a little bit about the CRF funding that was received. A lot of municipalities, utilities have received that funding. Your number, Loudon Water's number this year was under the $750,000, but that does not change the compliance requirements that came attached with the funding. So as we talked about it, I think it is a good, unless you have other options or other concerns or considerations that you would like for us to look at in the process, I think it is a good one to make sure that the compliance requirements were still met with those funds.
There's no reporting of that money that was received from the government to say how it was allocated or spent or anything like that. There's
Not to them, no.
since it's under the threshold.
There are other utilities that we work with have received either in and of itself over 750 or in conjunction with other federal grants or programs have received, and we've tested those funds in the compliance audit. A lot of the compliance testing does relate to the documentation for, there's an attestation from customers of their need, allowability, and the application of the funds to the customer accounts. So a lot of the testing surrounds around allowability and the application of the funds.
If the money's not fully utilized, what happens?
I believe it should be returned.
Yes, we actually used all of ours, but we would have had to send it back to the
Send it
state.
back.
The other item that we will work on through the process is following up on prior year recommendations. There were a few things that we had made note of in last year's process. I believe from our preliminary work, all of those have been resolved or mitigated in some fashion, but we will verify that through this audit process and report back to you at the end. The $750,000 has come through GAO.
Okay,
That has been the threshold probably since about 2005 when they increased it from 500,000. And that is the threshold for all federal awards, whether they are pass through, whether they are direct federal awards, and it includes all programs. So for this program, the grant award was about $540,000. If management or we identified through the process there were other federal awards or pass-through awards that took the organization over 750, then that compliance audit would be required.
okay, yeah, I got that part, yeah,
Mhm.
so in this case, if I'm following right, we still need a compliance, right? Compliance is still required?
The
I'm
compliance,
confused.
the compliance requirements are applicable regardless if you have a compliance audit, a single audit or not.
Okay,
So when you get a grant agreement or a contract and says, this is how we're going to spend the money, then you have to spend the money in that fashion. If there's a reporting component, you have to report whatever the reporting requirements are. Management must abide by those compliance requirements for the use and application of any funding. Whenever the money comes over 750 in a calendar or fiscal year, there is a separate compliance audit that's required above and beyond. It's above the financial statement audit threshold. The testing is very different from a financial statement audit. It is very compliance focused. Every award has a CFDA or a federal assistant listing number attached to it. And those awards tell us as auditors, these are the 6 requirements that we have to test for compliance. We incorporate those 6 pieces for every type of assistant listing number, and then we'll report back a special reporting package of those federal compliance. And we give an opinion on whether or not you're in compliance with those awards and regulations.
wonderful, that's a great oversight. Thank you. Yeah,
Welcome.
great, thank you.
The only thing I'd be interested in is I think this year you're going to be doing this as part of the audit is, with the last month or so with the war between Russia and Ukraine, and there's all sorts of warnings about cyber attacks and professionally and personally and so forth, and be on your toes and just want to test that to make sure that I have no reason to believe we are not, but just to make sure that we're safe,
Yeah, absolutely.
especially a water treatment plant.
Yeah, and any type of critical infrastructure should be paying very close attention to what's happening. And you know, while it's not within our scope for the financial statement audit to conduct you know, vulnerability scans, vulnerability testing,
Right.
it certainly is within our scope to evaluate what Loud and Water is doing to you know, outside of the audit. So, you know, so what we can ask the questions, we can review reports about, you know, what type of vulnerability testing are you doing? What are the controls around it? So that's what we would look at and pay attention to. You know, and we have the benefit of coming in with, you know, a number of years of experience working with the IT team. So coming in with some understanding of what controls are there, are in place and what to expect. But yeah, certainly between what's happening in Ukraine, even I think it was the 2021, the water utility in the Tampa, Florida area that was,
Right.
you know, that was breached. You know, we're paying attention to that and making sure that some of those, you know, issues are not, you know, not obvious here.
So, your partnership is with the government, right? On this? You have public sector partnership?
I mean, a partner, I'm a principal at YHB.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Jen and I are
Right.
yeah, shareholders in our firm.
That is key. Thank
Yeah.
you. I just wanted to know.
So we throw that term around and assume everybody, it means the same thing to everybody, so. yeah.
I have my
Shareholders
background
in the
that, so
firm.
I know what you're talking about. So we are good.
Okay.
So as far as the audit, I have a concern, and it's really in the construction field. I feel that the contractors, I've already seen it, are, you know, doubling their pricing in the anticipation of there being more problems than there really are. And I'm just wondering how we can circumvent that. We already have one major overage, and I've just seen it outside this organization where contractors are just throwing out prices and not really, you know, they don't care because they're so busy. They're just throwing out high prices. And I just want to make sure there's some way we can have controls of that in some manner. I'm not saying that Alton is not doing his job. I'm just saying, is there other ways we can look at these pricings and compare them? Because these guys are just throwing money right now at costs.
Suggesting that we possibly send our audit to some of our contractors.
I don't know if we're allowed to do that, but I think it's more in the process that we look at, not
You know,
to
we
the
have to have it in
contractors.
the process, yeah.
The process of that is very important. And the timing of your question is also very important. I think what you can see, and I have already seen it in the last few months with some of our clients, is there is some level of expectation of increased cost, whether it's inflation, whether it's world and national news and changes, to be very cautious. And part of this can be in training of staff and team meetings to make sure that the processes and controls are in place to review the data that's coming in, that even if there is some expectation that there will be an increase in cost, that it is verified, that it goes through the due diligence process internally to make sure that the team in place who's responsible for reviewing those change orders or reviewing modifications to contracts or pricing differences, that they have, one, things available to them to be able to price check, or tools to be able to do that in a timely fashion, manpower, process, whatever it may be that they need to do that, and that they have the time to do it. In some situations in the past few months, there's been a rush to make decisions. And I think sometimes that rush to make quick decisions sometimes does not allow for enough time to make proper checks of the data. So while I don't know if we necessarily can audit that, because that's going to be happening more real time and moving forward, we can look at the process that is in
Right,
place
no, I
for that
understand.
generally. But I think the committee and the board sharing that information with the management team and emphasizing that tone at the top down, that you're certainly concerned about the cost components and how they may change. It's important from the customer perspective, from the board perspective, but just not accepting that we expect price increases so that it gives your vendors and contractors an easy out to make those increases.
I know this is cut.
Go ahead. Well,
I
I
know
was
this
just going to
is
say
kind of
my,
a loaded question, but does that review extend to the operation of the board itself? How we review contracts, or is it just for staff?
We looked at that a few years ago. We looked at what information came from management to the CIP committee, from the CIP committee to the board, the documentation, the level of reporting. If I remember correctly, we had a couple of small recommendations for some added information that was incorporated.
that's true.
So we have looked at that fairly recently. If there have been changes in that, we can look at it again. But if not, I think what was going from the management team to CIP to the board was pretty well documented and sufficient.
This is more like we hire cost estimators. They come up with numbers, and then all of a sudden the pricing comes out and it's double what their numbers were. And there's no culpability on anybody's part for those numbers, et cetera. That's one of my concerns. My daughter was going to have a prefab house put in her backyard to try to do like a B&B, 1,100 square feet. You know how big that is? That's nothing. $600,000. Prefab house. That means a house that comes in and you stick it together.
Stick it on the wall.
Way above, yeah. Shock.
And it's just because this guy was covering himself. He was worried that, well, I don't know what the price is going to be when you finally gets graded and all this. And I'm like, whatever. So,
No, the answer is to go down
well,
to North Carolina. There are houses in North Carolina with some friends, exact same houses I have by the same builder, half the price. Half.
you got to live in North Carolina.
Well, that's
What's wrong with that?
Come on, Virginia's God's country. You all know
and he thinks he's God.
that. No, I don't.
That is outside the scope of my audit.
That's right, that's right.
We should audit that.
Usually if you put something up for bid, if you're a homeowner, you get 3 or 4 bids and one on the way off, that's somebody you want to do the work. I'll do it for you, but here's the price. We're getting that across the board now.
We might have touched on this earlier, but.
Can't hear you.
Sorry?
I said, I can't hear you.
Oh, I said, maybe we already touched on this earlier, but when we talk about some of the audit topics for the IT group, it's of course the SCADA group, which is supposed to be fully independent, not connected to outside networks. So that's important. And then I know we've spent a lot of time with our television monitoring of different sites. So security monitoring, those are important.
We can
Yeah, you
build
did it
those
the
in.
last time for us. So.
Yeah, SCADA is always one of those things that on the surface doesn't feel like it has a lot of impact on the numbers going into the financial statement. But if the SCADA network is breached, the numbers are going to be affected, because the pumps and all of those things,
Pumps,
you're going to have to,
generators.
Yeah. That's your whole architecture and infrastructure and operation. So we can certainly look at that from, again, a controls perspective and revalidate some of those.
And I know our IT group has kept them separate from the regular IT, and they have different passcodes to get at the different control rooms and stuff. So I'm sure it's all fine, but it's important, I think, to check it every year.
Do you want to speak to any of your concerns around the CCTV system?
No, I don't think I've asked that question before.
Okay.
But I know that there was some investment in it. It's just Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. I think it's a very important piece, and some of it's even been automated, potentially with motion sensing, alerting, software detection. Those are very interesting things to have.
Sure.
Yeah. Tremendous investment over at Track Rock. Very good. Not to mention here.
Anything else?
Me, all right?
No, we're just, if anybody else had any more questions.
We should try to make at least a half an hour meeting.
We get
To
close.
justify us driving all the way in.
Like I said,
Well, you didn't do that last week.
yeah,
Well, that's right.
One question that I have from the financial reporting side,
Mhm.
does the committee have any concerns of fraud or knowledge of fraud within the organization?
No way.
Any knowledge of non-compliance or compliance concerns that the committee's aware of that we should know of? We
test all the controls and so forth.
In terms of compliance, so, I don't have a question. It's not a concern either. It's just an asking. That, Carla, you're on the phone, right? Carla?
She's there.
Yes, I am.
Yes, this is a question for you before I ask Jen. So in
Okay.
terms of compliance, I want to get a better understanding of the compliance before I pose any questions. So I know there are a few documents that you provided throughout the way while I've been on the board in terms of compliance, but yeah, so I just want to have a better understanding so that I can ask questions related to compliance. Just making sure that we are not missing out on anything in terms of compliance, because we take that seriously.
Right. So, and actually Brian can add to what I'm going to say, which is that we have control documents, internal control documents that that apply to all of our processes. And I believe that Jennifer and her team review those every year as well. Brian, did you have anything to add to that? I mean, it's a pretty well documented process control.
That's true. I think we added a new one this year, but they've all been reviewed and they've been accepted by Jennifer and her team.
Right. So to address that, Ms. Ursakar, I think that's all going to be part of it as well, is looking at those control documents, how approvals flow, make sure that's tight, and also just the the approval process itself. And we're happy to share any of those details with you on certain or any function that we're performing.
Okay, thank you. Has there been any updates made to the document?
Well, we update them every year, right, Brian? I mean, we review them every year.
Changes, we update them. There weren't really many changes this year. Last year, we made some updates when we started working remotely, and some people's schedules changed, and we were doing electronic approvals instead of actual signatures. But overall, there really isn't much change from year to year. Those were probably the biggest changes.
Okay,
last
yeah,
year.
because that's important to know, because we need to understand the expected, right? But we need to also understand the unexpected, because pre-pandemic was different. We're still in a pandemic, but post-pandemic, it's going to be different. So we need to be keeping track of those updates, right? Those changes, because
Absolutely.
every little change can have a dramatic impact. I think we all understand that now. So, yeah, so I just wanted to understand that. Thank you.
And just to add to that, I mean, that was one of the areas that Jennifer and her team focused on last year, I believe, wasn't it, Jennifer, too, because things had changed and we had to be flexible because of how people were working. They verified that the controls were still in place, even though we had changed some process.
You're correct, Carla. That was an area that we focused on very heavily last year because the change some change had happened. Loud and Water was actually my first virtual audit in the pandemic. I think everything shut down on March 13th and we started on March 17th. A completely virtual process, but those processes were changing as the audit was going on. So not only in the 2020 audit, did we not only look at the 2020, or the 2019 into 2020, what had happened, but what was changing as it was changing.
Right, right.
Anytime Brian and his team had questions with, we're continuing this process or we're changing this process, they reach out to us. We have, I think, a good collaboration between the teams to make sure that the changes are good changes, or to make sure that the change does not change the overall control environment in a way that would leave a little hole for anything to happen. One of the things, so I feel very comfortable with the changes that have taken place because of COVID in processes. Through this year, there are some slight changes that I've seen so far, but not the extent that there has been from 2020. But we will look at them going forward too. What is the intent of the management team? Not only finance, we pay more attention to finance because that's the largest part of the financial reporting process, but we also look at other departments as well to see if they're going to be remote, if they're going to be hybrid, if they're going to be in person, how those changes affect the control environment. One of the things that's important to know, though, in the financial statement audit, at the end of this, we will issue an opinion on the financial statements themselves, whether or not we feel, based on our testing, they are materially correct. You know, for the organization as of 12/31, we look at, we test, we do control testing of the internal control environment, the processes, and the documentation. All of that bakes into our risk assessment of how we determine the overall risk of the organization. We do not come out of this process as a financial statement audit giving an opinion on your internal controls. That's a separate engagement, a separate type of project that our firm does for companies and for organizations, but it's not a standard financial statement audit.
Right.
I think it's important for committee members to understand that those two pieces, they are separate. We look very, very closely at the internal controls, the processes, review documentation, retention of documentation, because all of that plays into our assessment. But at the end of the day, there's not an opinion that's issued on your internal control environment.
Right. And if we are looking to have that service provided, then obviously, as you mentioned, it's separate, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you talk about that just very briefly about, what are some of the contributing factors that go into that, and also what is the, expected end result outcome of that?
Mm-hmm.
Just to get a knowledge base, it's always good to know that service you provide in case we ever need it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So an audit of internal controls, it would take very much what we already do in our planning process, but expand it greatly. So we would look at much larger sample sizes.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we make a selection of a certain number of transactions, which I will not tell Brian and his team, to get comfortable. If they tell us this is our process, we test so many random transactions in that cycle to make sure that it is operating as he and his team say, as management says it's operating. And so we get comfortable that it is operating. But again, that's all for a risk assessment process.
Mm-hmm.
When you actually are doing an engagement to audit and issue an opinion on the internal control, that population, that sample of the population would be expanded greatly to make sure that I feel comfortable signing off that the processes, the control documentation that the organization has in place has been well documented and vetted to make sure that I can issue that opinion. That the opinion is that it's operating as intended, the control environment they've set up, that there are no gaps, deficiencies, material weaknesses in the control environment.
Right.
So I feel comfortable in the financial statement audit process we would identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in the control environment, because we need to know what the control environment looks like and feels like and how it operates to be able to do our assessment. But in that detailed audit of internal controls, you may find more come out because the sample sizes are much larger.
Okay, okay.
Do you know if we've done one of those or no, ever?
Not to my knowledge,
Not
you
that
have
I'm
not.
aware of.
Something
No, I don't believe we have.
good practice to do it every so often? Even though, you know, you don't suspect anything, is it, what's the industry standard to say, okay, you should do one every so many years or something?
Unfortunately, I'm not aware of any industry standard
Okay,
that nothing requires it. It's whether or not you feel there's a need for it and
Mhm.
interest for it,
Yeah.
if there's value on the back end for doing it.
Yeah.
You have to look at the cost component, the cost benefit of a separate scope of an audit.
I will add, just from a different perspective, Jen can speak to the governmental requirements, but certainly any public company is required to have what's called an integrated audit, which does issue both the financial statement opinion and an internal controls opinion. So any publicly traded company over a certain capital threshold does have to do that. Financial institutions, if they're over $1 billion in assets, have to have a similar thing where there's internal controls that have to be tested over the course of the year as well. So there are frameworks in place and reporting abilities to be able to do that.
Sean asked a really good question. I was going to ask that, but he didn't. I thank you. I just wanted to branch on that. How do we know that we have a need for that, right? You know what I mean? It's, as you mentioned in your conversation with Sean, it has to come out for a need of that. Well, how do we know that we need that or not? So.
Unfortunately, a lot of times I think the need comes as a response from an issue or something has happened, or maybe there's been something in the industry that has happened that would spark, we don't want this to happen to us, so let's dig deeper, let's have the audit completed. But that doesn't mean that need has to be a response. If the organization, in your own risk assessment, in your own planning process, if you step back and think, I think this is good for Loudon Water, I think this is a good step. This puts us at the forefront of, it's not required. We're not of that size. We're not of the public nature that where it is a check the box. You have to do it. There's no option. But you certainly can do it. And I do think that there is value that will come of it, regardless of, the timing of it. I mean, because it is just a deeper dive into the control environment. But I think it's just something that the organization has to look at and consider as part of your own risk assessment process.
Right, and I would be happy to do that. I mean, take a hand on that and start that, because I deal with risk assessment. I mean, that's just what I do, and a large part of my job. But again, it all comes down from the need of it. We don't want to be, to the bottom line, we don't want to be wasting money and time and effort on something that, we like, okay, we're going to do it because it's an industry trend, or, it's part of, protecting our critical infrastructure, and then we need to have a better prevention than a cure. But in the end, we decide, okay, it was all very much wasteful and not meeting our needs. So to understand our need and then compare why we didn't do it previously, why we want to do it now, to start the decision-making process from that point of view. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, would you not agree with that? So, yeah.
Brian hasn't bought a 100-foot yacht lately, has he?
No, sir.
Just a 90-foot guy.
I have a question. I don't know if this is a proper subject for an audit, but I would imagine that Loudon Water has a lot of money invested in spare parts. And I'm wondering if it would be advantageous to have an audit of how spare parts are stocked, how they're disposed of, salvaged, that whole end of the company. If that could be the subject of an audit.
I think we can inquire a little further at the back end of the process. The bringing parts in, having the spare parts, I think that all goes into the inventory cycle. And we do have a process for that. We have looked at the control environment for inventory, not only the valuation of it, the security of it, who has access to it. I believe part of our recommendation 2 years ago was to have someone outside of inventory control handling to do the test count, and that has been done. We participated in the test count this year because of that, just to make sure that the test count was happening as we thought it was happening. That's one of the areas, a lot of things we can reperform and we can sample throughout the year. The inventory process, you need to be there when it happens. So when the test count took place this year, 2 of our team members were on site to participate in the count to make sure that the testing, that control feature that was put in place was actually operating as we thought it was. The only piece we probably haven't addressed specifically is the scrap end of things. If things are recycled, if they're deemed worthless, if they're no longer in commission. I know there's a process for that, but I can't specifically think back to that we have tested that. Unless you tell me I'm wrong.
Unless it was done as part of the whole inventory review several years ago, but I don't think that was probably included. Yeah, I'd have to go back and look.
But some of the spare parts, as everything is going up, the value of those may go up. So, management, again, as they do a risk assessment of different areas of the organization, that is one that the supplies, the materials, whatever it is, brass, copper, those metals, if they're baked into spare parts, may have a higher value now than what they did 3 years ago. So the rationalization for an employee to steal something based on inflation and the market and the value of those pieces that are available to them, that could change. But that's why the control environment is so important. The inventory and the spare parts that you have, you do have a good control process around them. The security around them is good. Not everyone has access to all of the inventory. There are test counts. All the inventory is within the system. So those test counts, as they're done, they should agree to what's in the system. As those counts are done throughout the year, you will know in a timely fashion if things are missing, if parts are missing.
I'm also thinking of when a crew gets on a job and there's some copper that they're disposing of, or a valve, is that being tracked? And because some of that stuff starts to be very valuable.
Now, you guys don't do security audits, right? I mean, physical security audits. Like you were just talking about the security and protection of materials. Who does that audit? Who comes in and says we're secure? Alton, you want to take that one?
Absolutely, I can speak to that one. So our risk and safety department is involved in that process and the physical security of the warehouse facility, and consultants to, come in and audit that process as part of our, security master plan. So it's done on a regular frequency.
Does anybody like NSA come in and check our facilities for security?
So we work closely with Homeland Security, is one of our closest partners.
Not NSA.
And so we have them in quite frequently to look at all areas of the
That's fine.
business.
That's all I wanted.
I have a question. So you've been on. No. I'm making a point. Thank you for your service. But I just want to confirm that before I say this, right? That you've been on the board.
13 years.
How is it you've been on the board for 13 years and you didn't know this?
Didn't know what?
What you just asked about the security. Was it like you as being a chairman and, being on the board, you didn't know that we had that?
Internal security, but I didn't know
Okay.
if there was an outside audit of our security.
Okay.
And I did know that Homeland Security was invited in, but I just want to make sure they continue to check what we're doing, because the threats change. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously right now the threat is even more, but you know.
I have nightmares, but don't add
Yeah,
to
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I don't see it,
yeah,
anybody throwing anything in the river right now, but,
okay.
you know, still.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want to, I'm not saying this to attack you or
Oh, no, that's all right.
integrate or anything. You know my style.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah, sometimes, okay. But with that being said, I just wanted to understand that, like, you know, because I want to know that too, right? I mean, on the board, like, obviously Mark is the senior on the board as opposed to my years here. But nevertheless, you know, I just wanted to understand that we need to know these things. You know, so because it gives us the opportunity to understand and ask good questions, because obviously that's the reason why we're here, to make this meeting as effective as we can. Right?
Thank you, Ms. Sakar. And I think this is helpful feedback to, you know, some of our other committees, like our Water Resources Committee. These are excellent topic areas that we can bring back in that forum and educate the committee.
Yeah, we
and
just
the
had the
board on.
cybersecurity one, so
Yeah.
I guess now I'm more just concerned about physical security.
Cybersecurity does not stand alone without physical security,
Yeah.
right?
It's all layers.
That's what we also talk about, critical infrastructure, right? When we talk about that, critical infrastructure doesn't stand in the clouds, right? It's all physical infrastructure leads to critical infrastructure. It's just the branching of that, or the foundation of it. So yeah, that's just asking those questions. This is great. Thank you. Thanks, Alton. Yeah.
My other concern is the audit of the snack committee. All the previous chairmen had snacks galore.
You're not there anymore. You just get drinks.
No, I'm the new guy, so I don't get Fritos.
It's the pandemic.
I remember peppermint patties were placed in front of Johnny Rock.
It's COVID.
Just perfect, like right there.
We're conserving. It's inflation. We can't afford the snacks.
You're not an Indian chief.
Is that Mark or Brian? Which one of you guys? Come on.
I can approve it, but
You can't buy it.
I can't buy it.
Blame it on me. I came to the meeting on like last week.
Yeah.
I was so hungry.
I know, so was I.
Because I was like,
Breakfast.
no, I was like,
We used to
okay,
get
I'm
like
gonna just.
donuts every once in a while. Remember donuts? Fresh donuts.
I don't miss that, but I was like,
Jesus.
okay, there must be a
I
snack
know,
here.
I know. It's all recorded.
It's a lunch. I come here.
I
there's
did,
nothing.
no, I brought some a couple of times. Are you kidding me? Johnny and Fred bringing any donuts? Are you kidding me? No way. Anyway, just kidding.
No, don't kid on that.
Not.
Because there's times you're so hungry throughout the day. All you crave for is a bag of chips.
Carla, are you hearing all this?
There'll be an omelet bar.
I
Here.
am taking notes. Yes.
That's breakfast, lunch, and your even
We're in the
afternoon snack
transition
all in
phase.
one.
We're going back to physical meetings, so we gotta give it time.
Do you guys remember there was one guy that used to come and just sit in the back all the time
Oh,
and never say a word, but always came for the snacks?
Snacks, yeah.
Yes.
You wanna get free
Never
food.
said a word, ever. Nobody knew who he was. Anyway,
Was he like part of the public?
no, yeah,
Oh,
public.
Okay.
Anyway,
Well, I think we've run out of questions. Just ask the committee members, I mean, does anybody feel a need for an internal control audit, to expand the audits of internal controls?
not me.
At this time, I mean, I feel like we just wait, see if you find any material weaknesses and raise any concerns, and we could revisit that at a later time, at the end of the audit. Any other questions? Any questions for us? Any other further? Appreciate your patience.
No, thank you. Thank you for your time this morning, for being back in person. This is
Yeah,
nice.
thanks for coming.
We do get a copy of the audit, or we don't.
We'll have another committee meeting once
Okay.
the audit is complete, and she'll walk you through
The
all of the
okay.
findings. Yep.
Okay.
Then we get to ask more questions.
Right.
Right,
that's
Right.
right.
Okay.
Don't
Good.
you think that Sean, as the chairman, should bring donuts?
No, it's not, that's not,
Chick-fil-A, no donuts, Chick-fil-A.
should not be, we're the guests.
I'm happy to bring those.
And that's only because I don't want to have to bring them in.
That's a Chick-fil-A on it. One of these times I'll surprise you.
I built in the time, I would have brought those. Thank you.
Well, if the committee members have any questions or concerns between now and the end of the process, please feel free to reach out to us at any point in time. Be happy to incorporate that into the process. But otherwise, then we will, once we are substantially complete with the process, then someone magically within Loudon Water will be in touch to pull us all back together to have the post-audit meeting.
What is the timeline that we look at for this? Like
So
expected?
we will be conducting the audit for the last 2 weeks of March.
Okay.
That's when the bulk of the testing and the tie down occurs. The annual comprehensive financial report is prepared. Usually that's completed by end of April. So management the finance team prepares the report. We review it. We do two to three reviews internally within our firm of that report. We also look at it compared to the GFOA Certificate of Excellence program to make sure that the compliance requirements are met for that. And then at that point, drafts are provided and we will come back. It's usually April or May.
Yeah, just depends.
Depends on the time. I mean, depends on when schedules happen, but usually late April or the first part of May, we'll come back to present to the committee and go through our required communications. We'll go through any management letter recommendations we have. If there are any findings or control deficiencies, we'll bring that back at that meeting as well. The required communications also includes if there are any journal entries or uncorrected misstatements that happened during the process, so we can report those to you. And then the opinion on the financial statements.
When you reach out to GFO, is that you have a meeting with them or just go, how do you?
No, they produce a checklist for
Okay.
their certificate of excellence in financial reporting.
Uh-huh.
So we go through that checklist line by line with the annual report to make sure that all of their required important disclosures, presentation, wording changes, all of that is baked in to the annual report.
Okay.
And then at that point, you submit everything. There is a new table they want on
Yes,
fixed assets
yes.
or on
Net
investment,
and
net-
capital assets.
so management submits that for their approval. I serve on the special review committee for the GFOA.
Okay.
I do not review any other reports in Virginia. I review them across the country. So a reviewer will get Loudon Water's report and they will review it. And that's how the certificates are issued, whether or not it's in compliance. So it's very similar. We do an internal process to your financial report the same way that the reviewer is going to do it when they receive your report.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's very, very helpful. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Good.
Anything else? Nope. I'll take a motion to adjourn then. So moved. Second. Favor? Aye. We're adjourned, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Carla.